Hello and welcome everybody. I have 2 o'clock right on the dot, but I like to be prompt and get started. I know that we will have some stragglers join us, but we also like to give you and everybody else a rundown how the code hearings work. So let's get started on that. The committee members, we ask that you keep your cameras on during the hearing. We ask that you please mute unless you are speaking. Today's subject matter expert is Shauna, and our note taker today will be Charlie. Just so if you see those names on the screen or see them on camera, that's who they are. We will be hearing quite a few proposals today. Hopefully we get through them all. Today is our last hearing for this. This is hearing number 4 and the last one. I know, don't get too excited, but you guys done some good work so far. Hopefully we can get through the rest of these and be done with this section of the code hearings. We will have a break about halfway through. We'll take a 5 to 10 minute break. There will be also a timer on the screen for those of you who are going to be talking from the general public. That timer will be up there for you to see. Also during the break, that timer will be visible. So how things are going to work, we will follow Robert's Rules of Order. The proposal will be introduced by the moderator, which is myself. We will then ask the proponent to speak. Please let us know where you're from, who you're representing, and then give us a short summary of your proposal. From there, we will ask anybody from the general public if they want to speak in support of that proposal. They will have 2 minutes to do so. And then we will ask anybody who wants to speak from the general public in opposition of the proposal. You will have 2 minutes each to do that. From there, we go back to the committee, where the committee will ask questions about the proposal. From there, we will go back to rebuttal in support from the general public, which you will have 1 minute each to have a rebuttal. And then we will go rebuttal in opposition in the general public, which you will also have 1 minute. If no one speaks during the first time in support or opposition, the rebuttal section will be nixed and we'll move on to the next section, which is discussion from the committee. During that discussion time, they will be able to make a motion any way they please on that. And then once a motion is made, we will call a vote. So the way we communicate is by raising our hands. So I will ask that if you can raise your hand, if you're seeing the agenda on the screen, please raise your hand, whether or not you're on the committee or part of the general public, because this is how we communicate and I know you want to speak. So please raise your hand if you want to, or if you can see the agenda. I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to do so with that. I still see a few hands that have not gone up. We will wait a few minutes on that while we see hands going up. Okay, and Charlie, I will go to you in a little bit here to see if we have quorum. It looks like we do, but we'll make sure here before we get to a vote. Okay, everybody can go ahead and lower your hands, and we will get started on the first item of business, which is item number 79. Just as a 79A, sorry. Just as a refresher, this item was rejected originally from you as the committee. And during the last hearing, though, we all voted again to rehear this item, to reopen it back up for discussion within the committee based on some of the other proposals that you had already passed and voted on. So we will forego the first part of Robert Rules of Order, which would be asking if there's anybody that wants to speak in support of opposition. We will jump straight into any discussion. But before we do that, I will ask Kristen to give us a brief summary on item 79A. Once again, just to bring you guys up to speed on what that one was, and then we will go into discussion. So awesome. Kristen, go ahead and unmute yourself and I'll bring up the proposal.
Super, thank you. So if you guys remember, we talked about the VOC materials on a prior code hearing meeting. So we have passed this in the IRC code committee, and this language is very much the same. We've just adjusted which code section those are in. And so this includes all of the flooring, sealants and adhesive, composite wood, other flooring, carpeting, site applied paints and coatings, any types of stains or varnishes, insulation, wall coverings, wall panels, gypboard, and ACT. We've also included any type of composite wood like plywood and particle board. So we've covered all the same material types that we have in the past. And this is also the same language, right? The same types of materials that we covered in the IRC. So our intent today is really to try and move this forward so that the IRC and the IBC can be the same. We've also included a couple exceptions here. So furniture is not included, as well as some of the not emitting materials, which are outlined in exception 1.
Okay, thank you, Kristen, for the summary. So hopefully that refreshes your memory on where we stood on that. So I'll ask the committee if they have any discussions. Shauna, I see your hands up. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the committee. So you guys had disapproved this on February 15th, but the IRC committee did approve it back in February as modified. And so I believe, can you scroll down? I think the modifications are on here. It was simply for reference standards, because the reference standards that were listed, and I don't know if they're the same ones here. The reference standards that were listed didn't have an addition to them, and they added those additions, like, you know, the second printing or whatever, they added those additions into the reference standards. So
yeah, I think it's right here
there,
in the red.
Right there, yeah. Yeah, so that is that you see in red right there is what the IRC committee approved as their modification, just to make sure that they have a specific addition of a standard available to you. So that's all I wanted to mention.
Thank you. Next hand up is Aaron.
Yeah, this topic and the next two, so all three of the first ones deal in some way with like environmental product disclosure statements. I realize this one can simply be designed and specified into place, but looking for the data that would be required by these next three proposals. Would require building inspectors to, or I presume, to be reviewing this information. I'd like to hear, is the city, how does that process work? How does enforcement and review of this as something that's going to be deferred in the construction process? How does that get reviewed?
Sure. David, I don't know if you're going to answer that or not, but go ahead, you're next.
I'll give you my thoughts on it. My first thought is we don't know how it will be enforced. I don't think. In my mind, this could be a specification item in plan review that it's somehow in the specs, but in terms of during inspection to make sure it's carried through, I really have no idea how that would happen.
So I don't know if it helps, but in California, they have a very similar requirement with their green code. And
I don't know if I'm the only one that lost.
No, I've lost that too. Yeah, okay. I've lost her.
Can you hear me now?
We'll come back. Oh, there you are, Kristen.
Sorry. So in California, they've been able to do.
Oh no, we've lost you again.
Okay, well, let's
Okay.
come back to
Sorry.
Kristen. I don't know, Kristen, if maybe we can utilize, I usually say don't utilize the chat function, but maybe in this scenario, if you want to try and type that out, and we'll go to the next person, and then we'll come back. Courtney, go ahead.
Hi, Kevin. I just want to make sure that I'm allowed to speak. I'm not on this committee. So that's my first question. Am I good to chime in?
Sure. Since you're representing the city, if you have an answer to that, let's go ahead and allow you to speak.
Sure. So I'm on the Denver Green Code Committee and the IEBC Committee. And as we've been going through these proposals, Eric Browning, the building official, is also in those committees. And he's made it clear that, to progress in what we need to do as a city, don't necessarily worry about how it will be implemented, how it will be addressed. But if this is a provision that we see that should be moved forward, the city will figure that out internally. So I just wanted to provide that information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. So I understand that how does an inspector know that these materials comply with these standards? I understand they want to move it forward and they'll figure it out, but how does an inspector know that a material meets the VOC requirements? I don't know if Courtney or Kristen can answer that or not.
Sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I switched internet. Sorry about that. What I was trying to say is that in California, they have a similar standard, and they do look at in it during inspection, and they have a sheet that shows them what the thresholds are. This particular one, a lot of these materials go after a third-party certification, like a Green Guard Gold or an SCS Indoor Advantage Gold certification on their materials, which guarantees that it's done this way and it meets the criteria. But typically there's a kind of a top sheet that has all of the limits listed. And then it's up to the contractor to fill that out based upon what has been installed. So it works. It's just, if they're working on like a lead project or some other third-party sustainability certification, this is fairly normal. And so some contractors are very, very used to doing this and collecting this information.
All right, next up we have Paul.
In the first sentence, it talks about installed interior finish materials, but then goes on to list structural wood panels, OSB, and other items that I would not classify as finished materials. So it may sound kind of picky, but I think it's kind of confusing to use the word finish, because if it was me looking at that, I might stop right there and not think about those items. So I don't know if that could be potentially modified.
And I think those materials typically are on the interior of the building, not necessarily structural in nature, but I hear what you're saying. So potentially that's an option for clarification.
Okay, next up we have Stephen.
Yes, could you provide a little more background if the IRC had any of the similar questions that we had? I'm going back to some of my notes when we disapproved it, and I noted that ASTM E648 was removed and NFPA 253, and there was kind of lack of documentation, and that's one of the reasons we disapproved it. So I guess I'm curious, did the IRC accept it with no changes and didn't have any of the similar questions the IBC had?
Sure, Shauna, I'm going to turn to Shauna for that.
Sure.
Go ahead, Shauna.
So I moderated those IRC hearings. So I don't have all my notes because I was moderating, but I do. I remember, Stephen, originally my notes for this was your lack of documentation and the reference standards and reference to California standards as well. The IRC committee didn't have, their concerns about the reference standards were about the additions the referenced addition to make sure that it had, you couldn't just use any version of the standard. So that's why they made that modification. They did have a similar concern that Paul, I believe it was Paul, had about the word finish material, because I mean, this conversation is ringing very similar about all permanently installed interior finish materials, because like you say, maybe plywood and particle board are not finish materials necessarily, but they talked it through, and I will tell you that they did approve it as modified, with the only modification being that putting those specific additions on the reference standard.
Thanks, Shauna. David, you're up next.
Yeah, I just have a question for Kristen regarding exception 1. At the end of that, you get to glass, concrete, clay, brick, and then there's a comma, and then and. Is everything after that and supposed to be one thing? I mean, if unfinished or untreated solid wood, there's a parentheses, I'm not sure why, and has no binder, surface coatings, or sealants that include organic chemicals. Is that last part about binders, surface coatings, and organic chemicals about the solid wood?
Yes. Yes, it is.
So that's all one item
Yes.
at the end. Okay.
Because you want to make sure there's no like some type of solid wood that's glued together, right? Or coated with some type of coating that would also, be part of the sealant or stain, things like that.
Okay, and then just one more question. Why did you include furniture in there? I would never have considered that an interior finish that would be regulated, so.
So I guess this follows along the lead categories. Furniture is one of those, and we just feel like there's, it's hard to comply with those. It's only systems furniture typically, and it's really geared towards office. So it doesn't really apply to most interior materials. So that's why it's included here as an exception.
Okay.
All right, next up is David T.
Hi, Kristen. A couple of questions, I guess. When you're excluding furniture, you mean anything that's installed as furnishings following certificate of occupancy or separate from certificate of occupancy? Is that correct?
Yeah, so it wouldn't
so
include like casework or millwork or anything like that. That would be included because it would be, made up of, say, particle board or plywood.
Okay, so my business is hotels, so if we're putting in a wardrobe that's scribed into the to look like it's part of the construction, but it's not part of the construction, that would not be included. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then following up on an earlier question, if this is only applying to interior finished materials, there could be something like OSB board or plywood that's built as part of the structure or part of the another building system that's not a finished system. Would that be excluded if it was installed, or is that supposed to be part of this?
Technically, that's supposed to be part of this, but because it's on the interior, right? And the whole point of this is to make sure that, materials that are installed on the inside of the building, right, aren't off-gassing to occupants of the building. So they're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. So, if it's fully enclosed, I could maybe see an argument for that, but I think it's going to be hard to kind of say one way or the other.
So it's going to be up to the inspector to interpret which of these materials are finished and which of these are not finished materials as they look at the installation.
Yes, I think that's probably true. There is probably going to be a little bit of gray area in terms of the plywood there.
All right, next up is Steve Thomas.
So since the building code does not regulate furniture, do you have a problem, Kristen, if we delete furniture and out of that exception number 1?
I do not.
All
No.
right, great. All right, thank you.
Okay, next up is Aaron.
Millwork really does seem the big question as I'm rereading this list and or rereading this in light of the comments that or the questions that were asked. I don't see millwork unless I missed it specifically discussed in here, and that really, as my recollection of the source of most VOCs in our indoor environment is from millwork and casework and that kind of thing. So I'm left thinking now I really would want to see a very clear definition. Architects are going to get hung up on what's in and what's out in this definition. Can you, I guess, is there, my question would be, can you verify that it is, that it does not include millwork or casework in this? And I guess the second question would be, would you be open to further defining it?
Yeah, I mean, I think further defining it would be helpful. I think the intent is to include millwork, but just not like standalone, like a furniture, I guess. And hopefully I'm saying this correctly, right? The other example with a hotel, right? If it's something that's standalone that they're building into a wall that would look custom, right? So it would be anything that would be used to build it into the wall, but not the like a cabinet or piece of furniture itself. So we could include the word millwork in here. And typically, if I would think that most millwork would include, some type of composite wood with some type of veneer on it. And so that would be included in this definition, right? If it's solid wood that's not treated with anything, then it would not, right? Which I'm sure that's probably unusual.
Can I just throw in something here? So I feel like we're missing like the first 3 or 4 words here that says all permanently installed interior finishes. So if that millwork is permanently installed, the finish of it is regulated. If it's not permanently installed, it would be furniture that is not regulated, right? So the permanently installed interior finishes. And then it goes into a such as with a long list. And I think that list is throwing people off, but it really is talking about all permanently installed interior finish materials. So that's anything that's permanently installed. And then second, I guess, because it is talking about the finish, you go into this laundry list of carpets and stains and plywood. If the plywood is the permanently installed finish material with nothing on it, then the plywood would be subject to this. If the plywood is covered with something, then that covering would be subject to this. So there could be a possibility at some point that you would have a wall panel or a plywood as a interior finish, depending on the occupant or the type of construction. And so it's just saying if that plywood is the finish material, that's what's subject to this. So I'm just trying to clarify that because it seems like the laundry list is throwing us off.
Thanks, Shauna. Aaron, did you have anything else? Okay. David, you're up next.
Yeah, sorry, now I'm gonna ask about the permanently installed. How do we define permanently installed? Is the question I'd be asking.
If it's on the plans.
On what plans? There's so many different plans, and if it's identified as owner furnished, owner installed, is that permanent or not? And this is gonna be Wild West for a hotel builder and developer, I promise you. That's where my question's coming from, because there's so many different elements to go in to a hotel room.
So, so is it delivered like core and shell and then the tenant fits it out, like the hotelier fits it out?
I can be, and there's a variety of ways that things like that are performed, and I guess permanently installed. How long is permanent?
Yeah, carpeting and pad are not permanent, right?
Right. I would say,
Yeah.
you know, if it's a finish that you know, is meant to be used, probably, you know, I don't know what the definition of that is. It may be something that we do want to define. But I would assume that anything that's installed with the base build or a tenant fit out, they can't be easily unhooked or be slid across the floor, would be permanently installed for all intents and purposes. Right, I understand in terms of hotels, right? There
Yeah.
could be,
A headboard
there
on a
could be
bed.
some. Go ahead.
You mount a wall-mounted headboard for a hotel bed. What's that?
I guess it depends on what it's made out of. So if it's like if it's constructed on site with, you know, plywood and batting, then the plywood would need to comply. If it's manufactured from a third party, it may not need to comply. I don't know. That is a good question. I'll have to think about that. How often do those things get reviewed? Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's definitely a gray area. I would think that would be considered furniture.
All right, we'll move on to the next one, which is Steve T.
Sorry, I just keep coming up with these questions. So is this intended to apply to all occupancies, including storage, factory, hazardous, utility?
That was the intent. I mean, we're really looking at the things that are off gassing in a space. You know, paint and things that are glued together, right, are kind of the ones that are hardest hit. So, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about anything related to like, you know, mechanics or machine or things like that. What
So
is there? Is there anything that came to mind?
Hazardous occupancy with hazardous materials in it, we're worried about the VOCs and that hazardous occupancy?
Yes, I think so. I mean, right, we want those people who are working in there, even though maybe they have the proper PPE, to be able to, you know, feel comfortable in that space. Now, whether they're working, you know, in a chemical lab or something like that, I think it's still, we should probably have a good environment for those people to be in, whether those chemicals are in there or not, right? Whether, what if the building gets repurposed for something else? And that occupancy is removed. Yeah, I'm sorry. These are great questions. I'm just thinking through them on the fly.
All right, next up, we have David.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, we've had a lot of discussion on this. Is it all right to go to a motion?
Absolutely. I was just going to suggest that after your
So
comment. So you beat me to it.
Spent 30 minutes and we have 13 more items today. So I want to make a motion for disapproval.
Second.
Okay. Was that Steve that seconded? Okay,
Yes.
I see a head shake. All right, any further discussion?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea. I think there's just too many wording problems in here that we can't fix on the fly. I mean, it starts out talking about interior finish materials, which is defined as the exposed surface. then gives a laundry list of items, and a lot of those are not the exposed surface. I mean, it's talking about the insulation of the building, the plywood that would typically not be the exposed surface. So there's some real scoping issues with it. You know, what's permanent, what's not. The exception is furniture in, which somehow implies furniture is an interior finish. And then the other thing I heard, the stuff that's not interior finish is intended to be in here, you know, like the plywood and insulation potentially, but it's not an interior finish. So we're in chapter 8 for interior finishes. So we're not even in the right chapter for those materials. So I think there's just too many issues to fix on the fly here.
All right, any other discussion? Stephen R. Stephen, you're still on mute.
I'll add to David's comments outside of kind of a city employee perspective. And I don't believe the items we identified previously have been adequately addressed. One of the items that concerns me a lot is it feels like an unfunded mandate. There's a lot of questions being asked that are going to have to be answered on the fly at the tail end of the CO. If it's and it's probably going to happen in some format, but it's just not ready. So I would be opposed to it as it's currently presented.
All right. So there is a motion to disapprove and a second. I will call a vote, but before I do, I need to go to our note taker, Charlie, and see how many voting members we got present today.
Kevin, we have 12 committee members present.
12, okay. All right. Aaron, do you have a question?
Does the public have to be, you haven't asked if there's anyone from the public who wants to speak. Is that a necessary rule of order here?
Well, since we already heard this once with the general public's feedback, we foregoed that this time through to save some time.
No, sounds great. Sounds great. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, good. All right. I'm going to lower your hand. So all those in favor of disapproval, please raise your hand. At 12, go ahead and lower your hands. And I will, just for formality, I'll say all those not in favor, please raise your hand. See none, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Okay, so go ahead and lower your hands. I just want to make sure that we have 13 voting members, and nobody voted twice there. So Charlie, if you could just double check our numbers there, make sure we don't have, I know sometimes we have 2 committee members, but only 1 vote. So let's make sure we got that squared away for the next one. It does not really matter on this one because it was 12 votes already. So we'll move forward. Thank you for that. Close this one out. Next item on the business is number P8.2, which is from NBI. I don't see NBI on the phone. Looks like, oh, we got somebody, Webley, that might be.
Hello.
Hello, Webley. Are you from NBI?
I am. Webley Bowles, New Buildings Institute.
Great. Why don't you go ahead and give us a summary of this proposal while I pull it up?
All right, great. This code change proposal, P8.2 embodied CO2E of concrete materials, supports Denver's climate goals, especially as over 50 million square feet of new construction is projected, and concrete will be a key ingredient in nearly every single new project. Colorado has been a leader in sustainable building practices, including recent legislation on the procurement of low carbon building materials in state projects. This proposal uses existing policy mechanisms to safeguard the public from the hazards associated with the creation of building materials and supports state greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. The proposal requires all concrete mixes except precast and those where no concrete providers have EPDs within 100 miles, meet specific global warming potential limits and document compliance through environmental product declarations, or EPDs. The materials chapters of the IBC have been in place and used by the design and construction industry to ensure that materials that make up our built environment preserve public health and safety. This proposal looks to expand the impacts of these foundational chapters of the IBC to further safeguard the public from the hazards associated with the creation of building materials in line with Denver's goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 65% by 2030. So materials account for 11% of global GHG emissions, with the majority of those being related to concrete and steel. As the Energy Code does its job to reducing operational emissions, the emissions from the building materials will become a larger part of the total carbon footprint. And to minimize the impacts of these materials, we need to work within the existing code structure to incorporate material greenhouse gas limits on both the most commonly used building materials and those with the highest greenhouse gas emissions. The Energy Code is not solely responsible for addressing the climate emergency. We need all the tools we have to limit the worst impacts of climate change. So in short, the reason I'm here is that IBC regulates building materials. We have publicly available concrete EPD data that has allowed us to propose to include conservative emissions values in which 80% of concrete suppliers with EPDs can meet these limits. The research and our work to understand the industry impacts provides for your consideration the critical impacts and information that this code change can be met with little to no project increase, and that many manufacturers with EPDs currently comply with the proposal as written. So further, as the industry has started to adapt to this type of regulation, existing state and federal procurement policies like Buy Clean have changed how industry provides and responds to GHG emission requirements in materials, specifically concrete and steel. The recent announcement from General Services Administration is a major producer of materials like concrete, said that it will buy concrete that exceeds the values presented before you today by 25%. Their research shows that 82% of applying concrete producers to a recent survey already comply with their material, with those GWP limits. So adopting this code change proposal will require the worst 20 to 25% of the concrete industry to improve for the sake of addressing city and state greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals for Denver, and especially as Denver continues to grow at the fast pace and use more concrete. So I propose the adoption of P 8.2.
Okay, thank you, Webley. We do have a committee member hand up first. So Shauna, I'm gonna let you speak real quick before we go to the general public.
Okay, thank you. Just speaking strictly as a subject matter expert on this, I just want to give some history. This will not be at all about my feelings about this proposal. I've done a ton of research on this proposal as it was being written, and for other jurisdictions that are thinking of adopting the same thing. But those opinions are not involved in this. Strictly, I just want to give a brief synopsis of what's going on at the national level. So the carbon dioxide equivalent definition here was proposed in the Residential Energy 2024 edition, along with some definition and requiring the emissions calculations on the plan submittals. There was a proposal for that at the national level. It was disapproved on April 14th. April 14th. It was disapproved 12-6. So that was just dealing with the definition. Just a week or so ago at the national level, a somewhat similar proposal that this proposal just deals with the concrete. The very next one we're going to hear, P 8.1, deals with the steel. There was a proposal at the national level going into the structural provisions of the IBC, S178, that dealt with both of them. And that was disapproved last week 13-0. And then I did some research into what's going on at ASHRAE 189, or for some of you who know it also as the IGCC. It has 5 different versions of this proposal being heard at a working group with no really decisions or anything worked out yet according to that working group. So I always want to make sure that, you know, we're not, whatever we do is not going to be a huge conflict with what happens at the national level. And so far, nothing has been approved at the national level as it pertains to this. So Denver can do whatever they would like to do. That's, and then maybe Webley might
Thank you.
Speak to that. I don't know.
Thank you, Shauna, for clarifying as the subject matter expert. We will now go to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. I see a couple hands going up. The first hand that went up is Courtney. Courtney, please introduce yourself, and then you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Thanks. I'm Courtney Anderson with the City and County of Denver, and I work in the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Thank you for your time today. I would like to explain why these next 2 proposals you'll hear are impactful for the future of Denver. Buildings and homes represent 64% of Denver's 2019 greenhouse gas emissions and are a key component to addressing climate change. In response, Denver has the goal of all new buildings and homes achieving net zero energy by 2030. And in 2021, Denver published Denver's Building Sector Embodied Carbon Emissions Report to understand embodied carbon impacts in Denver. The significance of embodied carbon grows over time as Denver's climate goals to reduce operational emissions through net zero energy are achieved for both new and existing buildings. In 2030, embodied carbon emissions will make up 27% of all emissions from buildings built in 2030 compared to annual operational emissions. Denver's report identifies that more than 80% of Denver's embodied carbon emissions are produced by the commercial sector, including commercial, industrial, and multifamily buildings. And most emissions are generated from the production of structural concrete, steel, and wood elements. These 2 proposals introduce the framework and targets to addressing embodied carbon in concrete and steel, such as requiring environmental product declarations, or EPDs, and having carbon dioxide equivalent limits into the IBC this code cycle. The majority of embodied carbon emissions occur before a building is occupied and cannot be reduced, which is why I urge the committee to consider and approve these 2 proposals this code cycle. Thank you for your time to speak and to consider these proposals. And I also want to thank you for your hours you volunteer to be on these code committees. I know it's a great amount of time and effort, so thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Next up, we have Brian. Brian, please go ahead and introduce yourself, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. My name is Brian Patterson. I'm speaking in opposition to this. I want to remind the committee.
Brian, I'm going to cut you off. Right now, we're speaking in support. There will be an opportunity for opposition. So if you want to wait until then, I would highly suggest that. So I will go ahead and mute you again, and you'll have an opportunity to speak for opposition here shortly. Next up is Rebecca. Rebecca, please introduce yourself, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. And hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Esau. I am representing Rocky Mountain Institute, or RMI. And I'd like to hit on 2 points in support of this code proposal. The first is how it aligns with the state of Colorado's Buy Clean legislation, which was passed in July of 2021. And this legislation is a really important component to help the state meet the goal to reduce emissions 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. The legislation will essentially restrict the carbon embodied in construction materials used on all state building, roads, and infrastructure projects. And it includes the same concrete and also steel materials in this current proposal and the next proposal. The Buy Clean law will require the submission of environmental product declarations, and then by 2024, we'll establish embodied carbon limits for the materials, initially set at the industry average and then becoming more stringent over time. So these industry averages are more stringent than what's currently being proposed in the code language here for concrete and the next proposal for steel. And really, these two code proposals work hand in hand with ByClean because the ByClean legislation is more stringent than the code proposal, and it allows state government projects to really lead the way, essentially leading by example through state projects and helping move the entire market towards even lower embodied carbon products than the, what is currently proposed in this code. My second point that I want to touch on is about cost implications, where lower embodied carbon concrete can be purchased at little to no cost premium. So I think this is a really important point to make. A 2021 analysis by RMI showed that concrete as much as can be, or concrete products that are as much as 33% lower in embodied carbon than conventional concrete can be purchased for less than 1% cost premium. Another recent market survey by the federal government.
Rebecca, I'm gonna have to cut you off. Your 2 minutes is up.
Thank you
for your time. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in support of this proposal from the general public? Please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody else that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will go to opposition now. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. First hand I see up is Todd. Todd, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Todd Olheiser with the Colorado Ready Mix Concrete Association. Currently, the Ready Mix Association represents all of the producers supplying Denver with concrete. Concrete industry welcomes the opportunity to work regarding green building and the reduction of CO2 emissions. Nationwide, the industry has committed to a goal of reaching carbon neutrality throughout the cement, concrete, and construction value chain and are striving towards this. We want to be part of the solution. However, the proposed code amendment is flawed in its placement in the building code itself. Denver Building and Fire Code 101.2 reads to provide minimum standards to safeguard life, health, property, and public welfare by regulating and controlling the design, construction, quality, and use. Specifically, reasonable level of safety, health, and general welfare through structural strength, means of egress, stability, sanitation, light, and ventilation. So it is very focused and not general regarding something to the effect of CO2. A similar amendment, and this was just mentioned, was presented nationally last month and was vetoed by all 13 committee members. And the CO2 issue is also being addressed at the state legislative level. And if there were a need for Denver to drive this issue, we believe this amendment should be introduced in the Denver Green Building Code and would like to be part of that. We hear numbers discussed regarding the price of concrete and so forth. We have not had any contact, nor have our members in regards to this locally, and we're talking Denver here. Lastly, the timing of this would now place additional supply chain issues on top of labor and equipment shortages already plaguing the concrete industry. Thank you.
All right, next hand up is Brian. Brian, this is now your time to speak. Please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Brian Patterson with GCC Cement. Production of all industrial materials have embodied environmental impacts. The clear cutting of forests, industrial timber mill operations, as well as the burning of coal in steel mill furnaces to melt iron ore also emit embodied carbon. However, this specific proposal mandated CO2 limits in the building code focuses on the embodied impacts of only concrete materials and not other materials used in the city of Denver. While we support And reduce report the goals here. This will provide an unfair competitive advantage to the non-mandated manufacturers, distributors, vendors of other structural or enclosure materials. Also, the use of a collected US-based ready-mix concrete EPD data from embodied carbon and construction calculator tool database to evaluate the ready-mix concrete carbon dioxide equivalent is misleading. Over 90% of the EPDs in the EC3 database come from less than 5% of producers in the US and primarily in the West Coast and Northeast US. Moreover, as noted in the proposal, the Colorado-specific EPDs accounts for 1.2% of the total in the database. This is not representative of the Colorado material impacts and certainly should not be used to set benchmark limits in Denver. It's been mentioned that when a similar proposal last week, it was voted down by the 13 committee members. Additionally, the units used in the amendment are confusing as the compressive strength is categorized in imperial system, while the CO2 limits are in the metric SI. This makes it difficult to make a comparison with the NRMCA benchmark report. I want to reemphasize that the Portland Cement Association and the Global Cement and Concrete Association both have programs for carbon neutrality by 2050, and we greatly support this effort. Thank you.
Annalise, you are up next. Please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Annalise Shepard. I am with the Colorado Ready Mixed Concrete Association. And I wanted to follow up on 2 points from Rebecca's comments earlier. One, the Buy Clean Colorado Act proposal, which was passed in 2021, was phased in over many years. And this proposal does not have provisions to do that. The state, in fact, with the Buy Clean Colorado Act, the state architect will not need to implement that act into their code until 2024. And additionally, she mentioned cost. And I just want to mention that the cost is not just about the cost of concrete for builders. It's also for the companies that produce the concrete. So we had an individual from Vara Companies who was supposed to be on the phone today, but he was tied up at a job site. They're a smaller family-run operation, and the costly life cycle analysis backgrounds for EPDs will disadvantage these smaller and medium-sized enterprises who will spend thousands to develop EPDs in a very short amount of time. And that's all. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Daniel. Daniel, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Daniel Kraus. I work with Denver CPD, but I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I'm a strong proponent of Denver Green Code. I helped develop the Green Building Ordinance and received the Mayor Stars Award for that. So I'm certainly a proponent of the ideas behind this proposal. My understanding, though, of the EPD is similar to what's been stated before, is that it's something that should not be regulated in the building code. And as a reviewer of the architecture in buildings and approving buildings when they do comply with the building codes, I wouldn't be comfortable reviewing for this. If I needed to, I would, but reviewing for it in the building code, it's not relating to the operation, not relating to the occupancy or use of the building and its function. It's simply a way to regulate manufacturing, and really would regulate it. My understanding would be it would regulate it on a national level. So it would be a city forcing a manufacturing practice that affects really the entire nation, and should be regulated on that level, or at least a state regional level, by the EPA and state agencies that regulate manufacturing. So I think that this is just a kind of a way to manipulate really a different field entirely, because the city has an interest to do so. It's not placed in the right code within the building codes, and I don't know if it has any place in any of the building codes, frankly, if it's a manufacturing regulation. But I would maybe consider, if we regulated, that construction workers be served ethically sourced coffee when they're on site, building the building. Maybe that's something that has, because I'm a big coffee drinker, but I'm not a fan of this.
All right. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. I see Antonio. Antonio, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Antonio Navarra, Community Planning and Development. I would second what Daniel has. I think that, especially with the IBC, we got to remember that the code is putting out the minimum standards. So these aren't the maximum standards. We're setting out the minimum standards. So I would just second that. I think that there could be a place for this. I just don't think that this is the right place in this code book. Green code maybe, but I just wanted to second that I think this is in the wrong spot.
All right, next up we have Dana. Dana, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you. It's Dana Rakovich with Burco, Colorado. And just a couple of things to ask as far as how this is written and how its implications are. It's unclear for the provisions and how they apply to new projects or renovations. What's the scope that this covers? Is there a minimum square footage valuation before this becomes, a part of what's going on? Does this apply to potholes being repaired inside the city? What's the, where does that scope apply and to what size scope and project? I think is something that needs to be looked at, and is a basement remodel and a high rise all treated equally based under this? How does that all come into play, as a part of what's being specified here as a whole in what I see? Thank you.
All right, third and final call. Anybody else that wants to speak from the general public in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask questions of the proponents. Anybody have any questions? Keith, go ahead.
Well, my question is, why is precast concrete and concrete masonry units, why are they exempt from this provision? It seems like it creates an unlevel playing field. Can the proponent explain why those materials that include Portland cement are excluded?
Happy to. So the reason that we've excluded them is because masonry units are specific in another location within the building code. And there's different, we want to make sure that it's comparable. So looking at precast concrete compared to poured in place is different. And so we wanted to make sure that when we, and if we do look at precast, that is addressed appropriately for the material itself.
Seems like precast concrete is probably covered in Chapter 19 of the IBC, and I suspect that there are precast concrete manufacturing plants within 100 miles of the city and county of Denver. So, I agree that the concrete masonry unit chapter is, I don't know, 21 maybe, but I don't see a proposal here for making changes to Chapter 21. Seems a little uneven in its application of this topic in general, but thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Aaron.
Yeah, so I would say I'm torn up about this proposal. We have a climate emergency. We need to act. This proposal would have a real impact. This would be measurable in terms of its impact. I would say to the Ready Mix Association, minimum standards for health, safety, welfare is what the code talks about, and I would say carbon impacts is in there. I think it's in the right code in that sense, but I'm really concerned about a lot of things in this. I think the one that I would ask a question of would be the cost of the EPDs and ability for small businesses to provide those. Can you speak to the ability of small producers to be able to comply with this, and EPDs for lots of products, concrete bought from Home Depot and used to fill a pothole, right? Was a question asked. So I would ask about what does it take? Can the proponent speak to what does it take to provide the documentation that would be expected for this?
Yeah, so I think the discussion that was presented before talked about documentation. And I think specifically you're talking about environmental product declarations themselves as being something that's submitted for compliance. So the cost information, one-click LCA says that the initial fees for manufacturing plant are about $8,000, and subsequent EPDs, so different concrete mixes, are in the low thousands. So yes, for those that don't already have EPDs for their concrete mixes, there is a cost. I will say that Denver and Colorado specifically has more EPDs than many other states. There's over 450 EPDs for different concrete mixes, and it's probably growing as we speak because of Buy Clean, and we're expecting to see more. I think that there is an opportunity here as well for the city and state to look at how that can be addressed as well.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Paul.
Yeah, I have a question on the 100-mile limit. I'm not a concrete expert, but as I was reading through the ASCC standards, they recommend no more than an hour and a half from plant to pouring. And I don't think you can get 100 miles in an hour and a half. So I'm wondering where that 100-mile came from.
It came from exactly that resource of how far can you take a truck? And we've just kind of estimated around 100 miles based on that research.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Don't see any more hands up. Paul, I'm going to lower your hand. So with that being said, we will now go back to the general public for rebuttals. There will be a time for rebuttal in support and time for rebuttal in opposition. Each person that raises their hand will have 1 minute to speak. So I will start first with any rebuttals in support from the general public. Please raise your hand. Are there any rebuttals in support? Please raise your hand. Courtney, your hand's up first. I will unmute you and you have 1 minute.
Great, thank you. And thanks for all the discussion we've been hearing so far. I do appreciate the comments about how this does belong in the IBC. I would like to ask Webley to elaborate on that a little bit as well. And also if maybe Webley can address some of the other comments you've heard from the public side too, that would be really helpful since you have a little more time. And I also want to acknowledge that there is a Denver Green Code version of these, and if we're not just addressing concrete, there's a steel and a wood version of this. So I just want to clarify that as well. And I would like the committee to consider what would allow you to move forward with this. If you think this is too stringent, let's have that discussion of what makes sense for this code cycle. I think the framework of getting this into the code is critical. So how can we work to address that? I would just like to hear that discussion between you all and the proponent of this. Thank you.
All right. Second call for anybody else that wants to have a rebuttal in support. Please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to have a rebuttal in support of this from the general public, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will go to opposition now. Any rebuttals from the general public in opposition, please raise your hand. Dana, I see your hand up first. You'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. This is Dana Rakovich again with Burnco, Colorado. Just speaking to the EPDs, we are a larger company. We do have EPDs. We continue to strive towards this. I would say the figures that were thrown out are not accurate to what an EPD costs for a company to get. It's around $10,000 to $15,000 to get your plant fully certified, just one plant. And then you have to get each individual plant then certified as well. And then there's an individual cost per mix. So obviously when you do a downtown job, or you were to be going after downtown work that have 5 to 15 to 20 different mixes, you then have to pay to compete against a larger company like myself as a small entity. It does disadvantage them in a significant way because they have to quantify those particular mixes each time. And as building changes, that continues to change. So this is a little more cumbersome to those small entities than one would think. So appreciate your time.
All right, next up we have Annalise. Annalise, you will have 1 minute.
There we go. Thank you. I just am going to piggyback a little bit on what Dana said right there. One thing to mention is the proposal indicates that the added requirements do not add to nor decrease the cost of construction, which is an inaccurate assumption. And creating EPDs is cumbersome, expensive, and time consuming. Individual plants will need to be certified to create EPDs, then each mix will need to be certified, which can take 2 to 4 weeks to gather the data for the EPD for each plant, and then another 2 to 4 weeks to enter and then verify the information before producing the public posting. Additionally, each plant and mix design EPD will have to be renewed and or updated annually. And again, trying to speak on behalf of some of our members, in this instance for Vasquez Ready Mix, which is a small operator of a minority-owned ready mix concrete business, who said that implementing EPDs would be extremely challenging. The cost, manpower, and time frame.
Annalise, I'm gonna have to cut you off. Your 1 minute is up.
This is Brian Patterson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, let's start. I agree with the last two speakers. Another thing to add about the EPDs is please remember also that they have to be updated every 5 years. And so it is a significant cost to the manufacturers. Although, our belief is that it is a valuable tool. But my main concern with this here is the selection into the building codes. And also we need to make sure that we create equal grounds, an equal playing field between, for example, the wood industry and the cement and concrete industry. I noticed that wood has not been talked about here. And so I have concern with that. And also the equal playing field between the individual producers out in the concrete producers out in the marketplace. Thank you very much.
All right, next up is Todd. Todd, you will have 1 minute.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
There you are, Todd. Go ahead.
I had to click on unmute twice. All right, Todd Olheiser, Colorado Ready Mix Concrete. Just want to point out the ready mix industry does want to be part of the solution. I don't want the group to think, well, we don't like EPDs and so forth. People are working that direction. We want to be part of the solution. In fact, working at this, again, the state legislative level with the representative, and we're very engaged in this process. It's phased in, there's a way to do it. And so we are all for some reasonable approach towards moving, and we know time's ticking. So we know that we need to be aggressive, and we believe we are, but we have to take quantifiable steps in order to bring this along. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition as a rebuttal, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no more, I will turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time for discussions or to make a motion. The first hand I see up is Aaron. Aaron, go ahead.
Question about what our committee could do here. In the past, there was a committee that was created to delve further in on an issue and then come back. Being that this is our last meeting and we've got a lot of things to get through, so there's questions about that too. But is there a possibility to have a similar arrangement? Make a motion to say disapprove but for a committee agreeing to different, to a slight modification or working on a modification of this. What's our runway to do that? How would that process work as a matter of procedure?
Sure. So since this is our last hearing, just an item of business here, that any other items that we don't get through today will be handled by the city and a smaller internal group with the city. But from here on out, this committee will not be able to hear any more proposals or bring something back because this is the last hearing. So hopefully that answers your question, Aaron. That unfortunately there can't be a time to bring it back because there is no more time.
There's nothing beyond this meeting for this committee. Full stop. Correct. Is what it sounds like.
Correct. Yes.
Tough position.
Absolutely. All right. Next hand up is Austin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as a practicing structural engineer here in town, we specify concrete on, just about every project. And so this one definitely touches close to home. And I just have a few thoughts that I kind of agree with what Aaron was saying, that this is kind of a easy, direct step towards kind of taking some climate initiative. And I really love it in that regard. And I just still have a few drawbacks that might keep me from voting on this today, but I love the direction this is going. Especially, when you consider things like the mass timber amendment that we voted on recently, that we moved forward with allowing mass timber to kind of grow here in Denver. This kind of is in that same vein of kind of sparking some ingenuity here in Denver in the climate discussion. So I think this kind of falls in that same realm. I liked what folks were saying, that this does fall, in my opinion, into the category of the IBC in terms of providing for the general safety of the public. So I kind of didn't totally agree with that angle, that it doesn't belong here. I think it does belong here. We have material specifications for all materials, whether it be strength requirements. There's lots of requirements for various materials. So in my opinion, this kind of falls into a different material requirement for concrete products. So in that regard, it makes sense that this belong here. But I just have drawbacks kind of in regards to, as someone mentioned, that this seems a little bit too universal to apply to all concrete everywhere in Denver, whether it be a small or large project. So I think that is one area that this proposal could be kind of improved, is by potentially adding some limiting factor of saying this only applies to projects of such scale, or I don't know how you would word it to make that make sense, but I think that would be a big one. It doesn't make sense in my mind that this be required for potholes and massive projects. I think it should be required on massive projects. It should not be required on potholes. That's just me. I would like to see, since the EPDs are still kind of new and a lot of places haven't caught on to them and haven't used them yet, the data still is pretty limited. So I'm hoping that with the next few years, this use grows and grows and grows, and we get more data to validate this 80 percentile thing. The 80 percentile seems a little bit arbitrary. So especially based on the really limited amount of information we currently have. So I'm hoping maybe when this comes around on the next code cycle, by then enough people are using the EPDs that we have good data to base it on and come up with a good percentile. Now, with that said, it is so disheartening to hear how hard it is to get these EPDs and how expensive and how cumbersome and all of those things. All that rings out to me is that folks won't use them. And if concrete suppliers aren't using the EPDs, then we as designers can't specify required amounts. And then the research can't be done. If we can't specify, cement proportions based on these rules on projects based on EPDs, because EPDs aren't made, then the research is never done and the EPDs are never validated. And so to say we shouldn't do this because the research isn't there, because the EPDs aren't there, well, the EPDs aren't there because the laws aren't there. And so it's kind of a vicious cycle in my mind. And that's what makes me think that this kind of legislation just almost needs to be forced through so that folks will be forced to get these EPDs, as painful as that is. And I know that it's expensive and not fun, but as long as it's expensive and not fun, people aren't going to get them. Companies aren't going to get these EPDs, and we won't have good information to base these laws on that we vastly need. So that's all I have to say on that. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, next point of discussion comes from David.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. First, I'm going to just make a statement. Clearly, there's a lot of passion around this, and I'm not going to speculate on who believes in what here. I know I'd like to see this issue addressed, but I don't think this is the right forum to address it. So I'm going to make a motion. First, I'm going to say to the ready mix industry reps and to the person from Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI is a great place to bring people together to collaborate and come up with a consensus solution and come back to whoever the appropriate body is. I suggest you do that rather than trying to come through this body. And I'm going to make a motion that we not accept this proposal.
Okay. Next discussion. So there's a motion to disapprove. Next hand up is Robert. Go ahead.
You need a second. You need a second.
Second.
We're not voting yet.
Well, you made a motion. You need a second.
I'd like to second.
There you go.
Okay, hold on. Let's see. Who was that wanted to second?
That was Robert.
Okay, Robert. Okay, any other discussion? So there's a motion to disapprove and a second. Steve, your hand's up.
Yeah, I'm going to vote in favor of the motion for disapproval. And I have to respectfully disagree with Austin. It does not belong in the building code. The purpose of the building code is clearly defined in section 101.3. It's for the reasonable level of fire safety from hazard of fire, explosion, or dangerous conditions, and to provide a reasonable level of fire safety for firefighters and emergency responders. So it does not fit within the purpose of the code. So plus I think it's difficult to enforce. I have no clue how a plans examiner or inspector is ever going to be able to enforce this. So for that, I'm voting in favor of disapproval.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go up to our note taker real quick because we had some discrepancies in numbers last time. So Charlie, can we do a little roll call and or get a count of how many members we have?
Yeah, so I still see 12 members. So I'm gonna, just to make it easier, out of the 6 participants that are in the panel this section, I'm gonna name out the 4 that I do not see as a voting member, and we can address maybe someone's filling in for somebody else. But out of everybody on the panel this section, myself, Kevin, Shauna, and Tony Thornton, I don't see those 4 as voting members. I'm not sure if anybody there is filling in or anything. I know Shauna is a subject matter expert.
Yes, this is Tony Thornton. I'm filling in for David Carnicelli.
Perfect, that makes sense. So we have 13 voting members in that case, Kevin.
Great, thank you. That's what we needed to know. All right, so I will call a vote. There is a motion to disapprove. All those in favor of disapproving this proposal, please raise your hand. I'm counting 10. Please lower your hands. All those not in favor, please raise your hand. You go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I see 1. Okay, so this does not pass. This is disapproved 10 to 2 to 1. Thank you very much for everybody who, including the general public, who spoke on this one way or the other. Your involvement's greatly appreciated. But before we move to the next item of business, we will take a break because I believe we will have quite a bit of discussion on this one as well. So Shauna, I see your hands up real quick. Do you have a comment before we go to break?
Well, I was wondering if there was going to be a lot of discussion on it because it's the same proposal just for steel. So I didn't know if we should handle it first, but I will go with your call.
Okay, we'll take a quick minute break, mainly because I have to tend to some business, but hopefully you all can as well. We'll see. I'll set a timer for 8 minutes and we'll see you in 8 minutes. Thank you. All right, if you can hear me, let's start making our way back. All right, welcome back, everybody. We will continue on where we left off on proposal number P8.1, and that is also from NBI, and I believe Webley, if that's going to be you, you can give us a summary of this. I ask that you stick to a summary of the proposal, and if you wanted to speak in support or opposition for some reason of your own proposal, you are still allowed to speak in support of that for 2 minutes. So just please keep this as an introduction to the proposal.
Okay, thank you for that process clarification. So my name is Webley Bowles. I'm with New Buildings Institute, and Code Change Proposal 8.1 EPD disclosure for structural steel supports Denver's climate change goals, just as the last proposal did. Steel is one of the most widely used materials in building construction and is a primary contributor to embodied carbon in buildings. The US steel industry alone makes up 2% of US greenhouse gas emissions, with half of those being related to steel that goes towards the built environment. Similar to the last proposal, this proposal uses existing policy mechanisms to safeguard the public from the hazards associated with the creation of structural steel products and supports state greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals. The proposal requires 80% of all structural steel products, including rebar, that's to be produced in a facility that procures renewable energy, or that the steel meets specific global warming potential limits, and documents the compliance through environmental product declarations. As mentioned before, this is aligned with ASHRAE 189.1, where there are 2 serious considerations, which all address building materials similar to what you see here, but not exactly the same. It's looking at a GWP and environmental product declaration approach. But the details are being refined, as they often do before they go into code. So that's the small change there. I do want to propose a change to this in the alignment of the percentage of steel products to comply with GWP to align with the EPD percentage. It's a very minor adjustment. So these could be included in the green code, but it should not be limited to the green code. The IBC addresses materials. The energy code does not. The IBC preserves public health and safety to provide safeguards from hazards associated with the built environment. And if we keep looking for reasons not to move forward with addressing climate change, this will only become more extensive to address it in the future. And as we heard from the concrete industry is moving forward with carbon reductions. Since concrete and steel make about 50% of a building's total carbon emissions, that's why we're addressing these 2 materials first. Other materials need to be addressed, but in a triage situation, you have to stop the carbon where it's at first. As mentioned in the last testimony, the energy code cannot be the only regulatory tool that addresses how buildings respond to the climate emergency. We need all these tools. So in short, IBC regulates building materials, and that's why we're here. So publicly available EPD data has allowed us to put GWP limits into this code, and we have used industry-wide EPDs for structural steel. Rebar, we use actual EPDs and set the industry average is about 175% of industry average, which cuts out about the worst 10% of performing of steel. And most of that is not American made. So this supports American made products. So this research helps to understand how we can reduce carbon within our buildings at a no or limited project cost. And many of the EPDs currently comply with the proposal as written. But we need to move the full industry, not just those that are working on state projects. So we need these material targets. I propose the adoption of this with the minor proposed changes, as I mentioned previously.
All right, thank you. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Courtney, you will have 2 minutes to do so. Courtney, please introduce yourself and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hey, thank you again. Courtney Anderson with the City and County of Denver in the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Thank you again for letting me speak on behalf of this proposal. I just want to reiterate a few things. You know, we do need to take steps to addressing embodied carbon. I just want to provide this fact again that Denver's building sector embodied carbon emission report projects that in 2030, embodied carbon emissions will make up 27% of all emissions from buildings built in 2030 compared to the annual operational emissions. I hear people wanting to take steps, but not really yet. So when is the right time for Denver to make a step towards addressing embodied carbon? And again, embodied carbon is different than operational emissions. You can't really retroactively modify embodied carbon of structural materials. So waiting for future code cycles allows all of this embodied carbon to impact our environment without the ability to undo these changes. I did really resonate with Austin's comment about EPDs aren't there because laws aren't there. Requirements and code do allow the market to progress. So what is that progress that the committee can see? And I do hear concerns about stringencies, about wanting exceptions. So I would ask the committee to please suggest what they would want to see modified. How can we move forward? I know the proponent is open to hearing those suggestions, to having those discussions. So I'd like to see how we can take a step forward this code cycle. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Rebecca. Rebecca, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And hi, everyone. Again, my name is Rebecca from Rocky Mountain Institute. Again, I'm in support of this proposal for the same reasons I mentioned in the previous proposal, but I would like to sort of acknowledge the cost of EPDs that we've been hearing a lot from today. And just with someone who works sort of on the demand side, EPDs are really not something that the building industry is ever going to stop asking for. It's really the one tool that the demand side can use to understand where embodied carbon is coming from in materials. We've seen the demand for EPDs growing exponentially across the US, from private companies and developers looking to track and reduce their Scope 3 emissions, to structural engineers looking to reduce the impact of their practice. Also, as I said before, the Colorado state requires EPDs for projects, and now the federal government does too. The GSA of the federal government. So EPDs are really not going away. And yes, EPDs do come with a cost, but the demand indicates that it will pay off and be a good investment for manufacturers. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody else that wants to speak in support? Being none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Daniel, please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Daniel Kraus. I am an architectural reviewer for CPD, speaking on behalf of myself, and just want to, as an architectural reviewer, reviewing and approving for compliance with the building codes. I wouldn't feel comfortable just because, as this says, shall be produced in the facility or facilities that comply with one or more of the following. So we're regulating the facility and what they comply with. So it seems like a manufacturing regulation, and it's the same piece of steel is what I'm understanding. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's really my understanding of this. Is the steel is no different. So the building as constructed is no different whether it complies with this section or not. So it's absolutely not impacting the building. It's what we're trying to use the building code to impact manufacturing processes. So it's just the wrong avenue. And if I think people would agree with me if we said that it has to be manufactured in a facility that is, allows workers to unionize or something. Again, I keep looking for the right example, but I think everyone understands where my discomfort is in just finding the right avenue for something that's important and should be regulated by whoever regulates manufacturing. Thank you.
All right. Third and final call. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, this is your time to do so. Antonio, you will have 2 minutes. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Antonio Navarra, City of Denver Community Planning Development. My comments are going to be exactly as the other one. While yes, we need to address these issues, we all understand that there's a big global problem that we can help with. It's in the wrong book. I think we're trying too hard to push this in the IBC, where in the eyes it belongs in the green code. As we pick up the green code and we start to adopt these different things, yes, maybe in the future we have an opportunity to take a look at that. But this seems to be a manufacturing thing. And more or less, I just stand firm on the same comment as the concrete, where it's in the wrong book.
Right. Being no more hands up, I will move it over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask questions and questions only. Aaron, go ahead.
Would the proponent be open to a rewrite that simply said, contractors shall request EPDs for all steel materials? Leave the definitions in there. I believe that EPDs need to be part of the process. They can't be reviewed when we don't know where a piece of steel is coming from. I don't know what mill it's going to come from. We need to make a market change and start making EPDs part of this. Part of the process, but it's going to be really hard on design. I think just the smallest seed in the code that says we're looking for EPDs on this, that sends a clear signal to industry that that's what we want, that's where we need to get, that this matters. But we take the teeth out of it because we can't. We're all, I think all the professionals here are saying this will be very tough to enforce. So I'm interested to the proponents if they would be open to a rewrite that simply allowed for the insertion of the idea that EPDs, requesting EPDs should be the responsibility of the contractor so that we can start moving down this path.
Yes, and we're open to that. And the cycle was laid out previously where if we don't have the EPDs, we don't have the data, we can't set the limits. So I think that a suitable approach here would be to require EPDs for all steel materials, structural steel materials, and the green code can have the GWP limits for those materials as a testing ground.
All right, any other questions from the committee? Third and final call. Seeing none, I will go back to the general public. Anybody from the general public wants to speak as a rebuttal and support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public as a rebuttal and support, please raise your hand. You will have 1 minute to do so. Webley, go ahead.
So quickly speaking to how compliance might work, it was previously stated that this would be the city's responsibility to figure out how this could work. In imagining from an architect's standpoint how I would submit information, I would imagine that at the time of permit, there would be a plan developed, a spreadsheet that was saying, this is how we will collect and present the information. And at time of occupancy, that is when the final cut sheets and EPDs would be reported.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Courtney. Courtney, you have 1 minute.
Hey, thank you again. I'll keep this just very short. I do just really want to clarify, there is the Denver Green Code. There is the Denver Green Code proposals that would build on top of these. So Denver Green Code is an appropriate place for that. It is a voluntary code. There is a limited mandatory use aspect to it, but in, you know, these proposals or these, they would all be voluntary. So yes, that would be great to be in the Denver Green Code, but to really make some progress, the IBC is the right place to address that as well. So I just wanted to clarify, there are two aspects to this. Thank you.
All right, third and final call. Anybody else for a rebuttal and support from the general public? Being done, I will go to opposition. Any rebuttals and opposition from the general public? Second call, anybody wants to speak in the rebuttal is opposition. Third and final call, any rebuttals for opposition on this proposal from the general public? Seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to have discussion and or make a motion. Aaron, go ahead.
I would just, in response to what was said from Rocky Mountain Institute, it's actually the architect who has to stamp it and say, I followed the rules in this book. The city enforces the rules as they see them. But if we put it in the code, individual architects are responsible to comply with that and follow that through. The city's there to check the work, and they can check it or not check it. I have to follow it. So in that, I would also offer a motion to rewrite the proposal to simply state contractor shall request EPDs for all steel materials and leave in the definitions.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So we would delete everything and just add a definition, a new item? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'd like for the code committee to weigh. So yeah, I guess my motion should be to open that for discussion of the committee, I believe. Can I offer a motion for then discussion of the committee to see if there's a way to make that that sort of very simple statement work? I would need others to weigh in on exactly how to craft.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to weigh in on that or have any other discussion? David, go ahead.
Yeah, Aaron, I'm just curious why you're proposing the contractor request this rather than just keeping, you know, maybe the 2205.3.1 section that's there that you have to submit them. We just don't have the requirements. So if it's the contractor, we would never get involved and know if it's even done, I guess is my point.
And I see that as one of the challenges, but I don't know where a piece of steel is coming from when I say that it's a W10x14. I have no idea where that's coming from, nor should I. So it seems, I mean, that seems one of the challenges with requiring EPDs is they are inherently sort of after procurement documents. So I could only say what standard I would have wanted to have met in them. But yeah, the document, it seems impossible to tie it to architecture in the planning stage.
Okay. Any other discussion or comments? Austin, go ahead. Austin, you're still on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. I'll just throw my 2 cents real quick. Just a couple of the things I just don't kind of like about the wording on this one. First of all, sort of in this first clause, the minimum of 75% of steel products based on cost. If you're including rebar and like structural steel, to be able to know the cost of all those things kind of upfront and then be able to sort of base a percentage on that is kind of an unrealistic thing to be able to do kind of upfront and then be able to kind of then request EPDs based on that. So well, I see, you're trying to find some minimum of EPDs to require. I don't know that, lumping all steel things together and then doing it based on cost is necessarily the right way to go. So that's the first thing that kind of caught my eye. I agreed with what someone else was saying, that the requirements on going to the kind of second part, this 2205.3.2, the requirements on the facilities, that just seems kind of onerous. And yeah, kind of seems, yeah, that I don't have much to say about that one. But the third part, the table, that then it just has kind of strange wording here of saying structural sections and then, hollow structural sections and plate, to kind of lump various steel components that way is just kind of awkward. So I would think there might be a smarter way to kind of break that out into maybe, I don't know, kind of more in line with how the steel code is written with, wide flange shapes, channels, angles, etc. So those are just the things that caught my eye there in terms of ways that the wording could be improved. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. Our subject matter expert for the committee, Shauna, has her hand up.
Yeah, so I'm just in an attempt to narrow this conversation to where we want it to go. There's conversation right now on the whole proposal, but Aaron had made a motion in order to get discussion going on just talking about the contractor shall request EPDs. And so it didn't get a second, but I don't know that we asked for one. I'm just trying, are we going to move forward talking about Aaron's idea of amending it, or are we going to move forward with the whole proposal, or it's open to anything? I'm just trying to narrow this down.
Sure. So let's Aaron, let's open your mic back up and see if we can't modify this to what you wanted it to say. And then we will call for a second and see if anybody has a second.
My proposal would be contractor shall request EPDs, leaving the definition that's in here of the EPDs, just leave that's in there for all steel for all steel products, but I'm realizing that's going to be more restrictive really than what's even being proposed, because it's the 80%. There may just not be a way to do this. This is us writing the code on the fly, and I really don't want to do that. It may be better that, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm realizing, if I start to add percentages into this, it just winds up in a totally different place and we're writing code on the fly. I'm not sure if there's a way for our committee to narrow this so much that we can that we can at least make a step towards saying EPDs matter in the building code. It may just be too difficult to do that in the context of writing it live in a committee hearing.
Okay, fair enough. Unfortunately, we don't have another hearing. So are you going to remove your motion then?
Yeah, I removed my motion.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Sean, I see your hand up, but I think it's still left over. Does anybody have any other discussion or want to make a motion? Robert, go ahead.
I make a motion to disapprove.
Okay, is there a second?
Second, Steve Thomas.
Okay, Steve seconded. Any other further discussion before I call a vote? Stephen R., go ahead.
Quick comment for the proponents. I know in this proposal and the previous proposal, they were asking for input on how maybe to fix it. And I guess a suggestion I would have is these are such complicated matters that they really need to kind of utilize what the ICC process of a task group or a work group of all interested parties would participate to bring something back that has answered all these questions. And that's generally how it's done, and not tried to be addressed on the floor. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, great. Steve T.
So speaking in favor of opposition for basically the same reason the previous, it's not within the purpose of the code. It's also I don't know how you would enforce this from a building code. To kind of jump on Steve Rondinelli's comment about maybe some suggestions, I think it does belong in the green code. This is probably not real popular, but maybe some parts of the green code should be mandatory instead of voluntary. I don't know, maybe that's the way you get what you need, but I don't think it belongs in the building code.
All right, any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote. The motion is to disapprove. All those in favor of disapproval, please raise your hand. I count 11. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those not in favor of disapproving, I hate double negatives. It always ties me up. I don't see any. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Two. Okay, so this is disapproved 11 to 0 to 2. All right, we will move on to the next item of business. That is item number P42, and Councilman is on the line here. Actually, the last time there was a councilman on the line, I said congressman, so I'm glad I didn't mess that up this time. But go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'll pull up your proposal.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Chris Hines. I serve on Denver City Council representing District 10. It's basically the city center. I serve more than 70,000 constituents, 6,500 businesses. I'm also the first elected official in Denver's history who uses a wheelchair for mobility, and the first who identifies as a member of the disability community. Before I was elected, I was an advocate for people with disabilities. Governor Hickenlooper signed the Chris Hines Act into law in May of 2018. Yeah, they started naming laws after me. It was a law that focused on changing parking for people with disabilities in the state of Colorado. So I know a bit about parking for people with disabilities. This amendment is also referring to parking for people with disabilities. Put more specifically, it's that we should encourage everyone to switch rapidly from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, including people with disabilities. I learned about the challenge here that this amendment is attempting to address when I went to multiple electric vehicle dealers, and each of them recommended I not purchase an electric vehicle because of the inaccessibility of EV charging stations for people with disabilities. After more research, it turns out there are no regulations, local, state, or federal, regarding access to EV charging stations for people with disabilities. One might assume that ADA would apply, but that isn't the case. Fortunately, we do not legislate for things that don't exist, and EV charging stations didn't exist when ADA was passed in 1990. The only potential overlap is if an entire parking lot has every space with an EV charging station. Only then would parking regulations apply, and that would only be tangentially because of regulations around parking lots. So this particular recommendation uses the principle of universal design, as in every space is designed for everyone. The recommendation is from, I didn't come up with this on my own, it's from the US Access Board, a federal standard setting body that focuses on access for people with disabilities. And the gist is that for all new construction, all EV enabled spaces should be designed to accommodate everyone, including people with disabilities. So basically, the space would be a little bit bigger. It also explicitly eliminates the requirement for the international symbol of accessibility to appear on any spaces. That's the blue wheelchair logo that specifically identifies the space as reserved for someone with a placard or plate or identification that, that qualifies someone for access to a particular parking space for people with disabilities. So let's talk about civil rights. Civil rights advocates for equal access for people with disabilities. And if one of two spaces or one of four spaces are reserved for people with disabilities, that would mean that the percentage of electric vehicle charging spaces reserved for people with disabilities would be higher than the percentage of Colorado drivers who qualify for those spaces. Basically, the principle is equal access, and to require a space be marked would be preferential access, which is against the spirit of ADA. In 2019, the percentage of Colorado drivers that have a placard or plate qualifying for a space is about 10 to 12%. Now, obviously, that's lower than 25 or 50% if one in two or four spaces were reserved for the disability community. This amendment also addresses a tough issue regarding regulation. The International Symbol of Accessibility, that blue wheelchair logo, that means that anyone with a placard or plate shall have the right to park in that space. So that's federal law. We also have some states and some municipalities have local law that says that only EV vehicles can park in vehicles that have EV chargers. Well, federal law supersedes state and local law, but it's very difficult for different enforcement entities to know the hierarchy of standards. So just making sure that all the spaces have universal design is the best for everyone. It solves the issue of preferential access. It makes sure that everyone has equal access, and eliminates all the confusion around enforcement of the spaces. So that's the gist. Obviously, that's in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Councilman. I will open it up to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Alan, I see your hand up. Please introduce yourself, and you will have 2 minutes to do so.
Alan Yunong, City and County of Denver, Community Plan Development. I'm with the Commercial Plan Review team. I actually assisted Councilman Hines greatly on this amendment, and I would ask the committee if it would be okay if technical questions came up that the councilman was not able to address, if I could step in and run through those questions and hopefully answer them for you. The proposal is designed to accommodate both the need for additional maneuvering space at EV spaces, as well as create EV parking spaces that could serve any type of EV vehicle user, whether they had a disability or not. I'm looking at IBC table 1106.2, which is a table for required accessible spaces. If you look at the top range, say for 1 to 25 spaces, one space would be required, which is a percentage of about 4%. We're proposing to increase the amount of what we're designating as universal parking spaces with the increased aisles, to 8%, per the table that's presented on the proposal. Spacing would be based on a 10-foot space with 3-foot access aisles. So in theory, a person without a disability could use this space, and they're afforded the extra space to maneuver any charging apparatus to their vehicle. If a person with a disability was to use this parking space, they'd have the option to offset the parking per the diagram to create the required accessible access space to the vehicle. I just want to reiterate what the councilman presented, that we're not proposing a designated accessible space, but rather a space that would be universal for all.
All right, second call. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call. Anybody who wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll turn it over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask any questions. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I have 2 questions for the proponent. The first part of this deletes 11 or rewrites 1107.2.1 that in the building code requires accessible spaces. So the intent is to delete that and replace them with the universal spaces. Is the intent also, we currently have an amendment in the energy code that requires at least one accessible space to either be EVSE installed or EV ready. Is the intent here that we'd also delete that amendment to match this deletion? That's the first question, then I have a second one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wren, for the question. The intent is that all the spaces will be designed accessible for people with disabilities, and there would be no need for any space to be reserved for people with disabilities. So to your question, yes, it would be, this would make that section or that proposed amendment obsolete.
Okay. Second question, in the table, it talks about, it's based on the number of EV charging stations required. If they were to provide more than is required, they would not have to follow this. Is that the intent, or would the intent be more that's a provided instead of required?
Yeah, so again, thank you, Mr. Wren, for the question. That is a wonderful question. When I crafted this amendment with Mr. Yanong's help, I did not think of people who might do more than the minimum. It's the world we live in. I like that idea, and if this body would be willing to accept that as an amendment of all the spaces installed rather than all the spaces required, I would be supportive of that friendly amendment.
Thank you.
All right, next question comes from Steve.
So the way I'm reading this is that this would not be a restricted use, so that somebody without a disability could use that parking space. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Thomas. The spirit of civil rights laws is for equal access. And if there are, say, 4 EV charging spaces and they are all taken by people without a disability, that's equal. I mean, that's people without a disability also would have to wait. People with a disability would have to wait. Now, if any of those spaces became available and it was that person with the disability's turn to occupy one of the spaces, they could occupy any of the spaces. So again, that's in the spirit of civil rights where it's equal access. So yes, I would agree with you. Sorry.
Okay, that's why I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry. So would you consider an EV parking, the EV parking spaces a separate parking facility?
So that is a technical question. I think that is currently being debated at the federal level of whether an EV bank is considered a separate parking facility. I would maybe defer to Mr. Yanong, but I believe that is not a settled question. And we could wait for the federal government and the federal standards bodies to come up with whatever, or we could be proactive here in the city and make sure that we move forward as a municipality.
I will allow Alan, if you want to answer that, since you were proponent of this, or a co-writer of this, if you wanted to answer that technical part, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm probably the same level of knowledge on whether this is a facility. I would not consider it a facility. I consider this part of the provided parking.
So are you aware that ICC has made the interpretation, that ICC staff has made the interpretation that it is a separate parking facility? Therefore, the requirements in the code for number of accessible parking spaces also apply to EV spaces?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. So then this would actually make this less restrictive than what's in the current code, correct? Because it makes it a universal facility instead of a fully accessible space.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Yeah, it would be less restrictive for the general public, and frankly, I think it is in the spirit of civil rights of making sure that everyone has equal access.
All right, great, thank you.
Okay, next question comes from Keith.
Hi, I have a couple of questions as well. The first one is in the section 1111 of the IBC, there's a requirement to put signs designating accessible spaces. And I'm wondering if this amendment just gets rid of the idea that there are accessible spaces. And therefore that provision in 1111, I wrote it down, 0.9 maybe, that talks about signs would no longer be applicable. I'm just a little nervous about not having any signed spaces for people with disabilities, because it seems to be contrary to the I codes and maybe also the Transportation Board, Federal Transportation Board requirements. And then my second question is, in our Energy Conservation Code requirements, we have 3 different types of EV parking spaces. We have capable spaces, we have ready spaces, and then we have the spaces that are actually fully configured and have a charging station there. And that can amount to 25% of the total parking spaces if you add those 3 together. And I'm just wondering, do we only use the EVSE parking criteria to determine how to apply this table 1107.2.1, or is it the total amount of parking spaces that have any degree of EV preparation as the number to use? What I'm thinking is that the title of the column there, number of electric vehicle charging stations required, or actually the other column should maybe be synced with Denver's amendments to the Energy Conservation Code, and it's a minimum number of, I don't know, I'm confused, but there are 3 different kinds of charging stations, and I'm wondering if this quantity applies to the aggregate or just one of those categories. Thank you.
Councilman, do you have a response to that?
Yes, can you, oh, you can hear me. I'm sorry, I thought I was muted. Yes, so second question first, the intent is to only apply to the 3rd category, the new spaces that are constructed that have an EV charging station already installed. So I can understand with your question why you think the wording of this table might be confusing, but the intent is just the ones that are installed and required as the building is built. The other spaces will be considered down the road, and we can address those down the road when those EV stations are installed, or have this just remain silent about the other ones. To your first question, this is only meant to apply to the bank of EV charging stations, not to all parking for people with disabilities in all situations. So sure, ADA would apply to parking lots and whatnot. And this amendment would only apply to a bank of charging stations for electric vehicle charging stations. Currently in the city and county of Denver, I know of 1 space in the entire city that has the international symbol of accessibility associated with an EV charging station, and that's at City Park Golf Course. Even the city-owned parking garage by the Art Museum has a few EV charging stations. None of them have any international symbol of accessibility or accessibility designs, or so basically we would be moving towards a more accessible set of EV charging stations for a better Denver than what we have today.
All right, next question comes from Juan.
Hi, I'm Juan Pacias, 88 Building Plan Review, City County, Denver. So I reached out to Bill Bline, who is a U.S. Access Board DOJ, and they do like the amendment. The one thing that they are still have a question about is ADA usually is equal, or so you're never less or So if there's if municipal code is greater or equal, that's fine. So the one thing that they were kind of worried about is taking off the one van accessible, because ADA parking, electrical parking is not it's not part of general parking. So if there's 25 spaces of standard parking, public, and then there's 10 spaces of EV parking, that's not, you can't use that van accessible space for the general public, the general parking scope. So what they told me, at least what Bill told me, is that you know, the van, at least try to keep one van in there, because it's not required by the federal law, but usually federal law follows. IBC will change first. So 2017 ASCII came out because of it's an act of federal Congress. It'll probably be a while before ADA 2025, 20 whatever version comes out. We'll catch up to that. With that being said, ADA at least must be equal or greater. ADA can't be used less than what the IBC. So I see IBC says one van in there on a 107.21. So so I would say we at least try to keep that, and then if the remainder of the parking is the remainder parking, you know, universal, that's fine, but we still got to at least try to keep that one van, because once a future ADA version comes out, it'll probably match up to what 1107.21. But like I said, it's not, as Councilman Hines has said, it's not a federal mandate yet. It always takes a little while to catch up, but that'll probably be where it's headed.
May I?
Okay,
respond?
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I'd just say that right now we don't have any accessible parking spaces for EV charging stations at all in our city, other than that one parking space at City Park Golf Course. And so this proposed amendment is better than our current regulations. As far as what might happen in the future, well, again, we make regulations based on what we know today, as opposed to what might happen in the future.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Shauna, our subject matter expert for the committee.
Yeah, I just was going to, Keith had thrown out some code sections, and so if anybody is trying to follow along in the building code, it's 1112 for the signage, and that signage that talks about in 1112.1 that tells you that if accessible parking spaces require signage, is accessible parking required by 1106 has to have the signage per 1112. And so those are the sections that we're talking about. This is proposing to amend 1107. And so all of that other signage that's required under 1112 would still apply, except for these very specific for EV charging.
Okay, thank you for that clarification on that, Shauna. Next question comes from Steve.
So based on what Shauna just said, there would be no signage requirements for this type of space, correct? Yeah. So,
Donna.
Sorry, I have a delay on my mute button, and so I apologize.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way he was explaining it, the way it is, it's a universal, so you wouldn't be allowed to put that typical wheelchair sign on there, because it has to, the size is big enough to accommodate ADA or other vehicles. So it's universal. And so anybody could park there. So you couldn't have a wheelchair sign on there because it has to be available to everybody, but the size fits everybody. This is the way that I'm understanding it.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I do have to go back to the general public for rebuttals in support. Anybody from the general public that wants to have a rebuttal in support, please raise your hand. Anybody wants to have a rebuttal in support, please raise your hand. Councilman, you will have 1 minute for a rebuttal.
Thank you. I just wanted to, the subject matter expert had a really good point about the spaces. Should federal law require us to identify one of these spaces as van accessible, all we have to do is put the paint on the ground and the sign, because the dimensions are already designed and constructed to accommodate that space. So so should there be future regulation that requires it, we wouldn't have to restraight the parking lot. We just put the international symbol of accessibility on one of the spaces. Thank you.
All right, third and final call. Anybody else that wants to speak in a rebuttal for support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will go back to the committee. Committee, this is your time for further discussion and or to make a motion. Any motions? And seeing that there's no discussion, anybody want to make a motion? David, go ahead.
I move to approve.
Okay, Steve, sorry, is there a second? Let's see, Robert.
I'll second that.
Okay, Steve, your hand's up next.
Okay, well, I'll talk. I was going to make a motion for disapproval. So I can't support the motion for approval. I think this lessens accessibility. I understand universal design and universal and what the councilman has mentioned, trying to make it fair for everyone. But I think this actually reduces it below what the ADA says, because the ADA also talks about separate parking facilities. In my opinion, and the way I've consulted architects, is that that is a separate parking facility and you have to provide accessible parking, and that the architects that I work with are doing that. Of course, those are in newer buildings and those kind of things. Those are even under the current code, under the 2018. And so it's just my opinion that we should have a fully accessible space that is reserved for people with disabilities, and provide that service. So I have to vote against the approved motion.
Okay, Julie, you're up next.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm in support of this. And I know we've already got a second to approve. I do want to mention that we did talk about making a modification in the first column where it says number of electrical vehicle charging stations required. We did talk about modifying that to say stations provided.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. David, since that was your motion, do you want to modify that at all under your motion?
I haven't made a motion yet. Oh, you're different David, sorry.
David Thorpe, sorry.
There are a lot of us Davids out there, David, no problem. I'm afraid I haven't fully thought that step all the way through, so I'm going to leave my motion as it is for no moment.
Okay. So next discussion comes from David R.
All right. Couple comments. I like the proposal. I don't know that it's deleting or reducing accessibility, because the parking space size that's required ends up to be a van space, because it has a 36-inch access aisle on each side. So it looks like it's narrower, but it's on each side. So the total width ends up being 16 feet, where you could get a van if they kind of parked in one of the access aisles, I guess. But we also have a lot of projects based on our energy code requirements for charging stations that only require one EV station. So if we leave the base code as it is, that will be required to be an accessible van space with signage. And now that one EV parking space that we require is only available to people with the placard on their car. And I think that's a missed opportunity for electrical vehicle charging stations. So I support the proposal, and if it's possible, I know on national level rules, you can introduce a modification in the middle of a motion at any time. So would it be possible to introduce a modification?
Sure. I think Julie may have wanted to do that as well. So sorry, Julie, if we overstepped that, but sounds like we might change some things.
All right, I'd like to make a motion for a modification to change required to provided in the table. And I think I need a second from someone.
Oops. I'll second that.
Okay.
And the reason I want this is, you know, one, we have requirements in the energy code to provide a certain amount of spaces when for new construction, say. Oftentimes they just meet the minimum. Well, we are also seeing a lot of projects in Denver where existing buildings are putting in electric vehicle charging stations that aren't required. They're doing it because they want to. They want to help their people and put in charging stations. So in those cases, if it stays as required, they wouldn't have to do anything. So I think it's better that it's worded as provided, and then you get, this would kick in for the voluntary situation as well.
All right, thank you. David T., you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. The spirit of that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm just trying to think my way through, you know, if you are a building owner who wants to enhance EV stations and you have a very small and tight existing below grade parking structure where you're going to do it, and just can't do this there, you know, might be a requirement for one, and you'd work to make that happen maybe outside on the street somewhere or something like that. But I just see the law of unintended consequences kind of slowing down the expansion of EV charging potentially in existing buildings that were not built with this in mind. That's my reservation.
Okay, any other discussion? Juan, go ahead.
So, in terms of federal accessibility, I say we're good because whenever federal changes, it changes. So if it changes next year, if it changes in 6 months, it'll happen, and it goes into law, federal law, which will, you know, it'll override anyway. And if they say they want a ban in there, then it'll happen regardless of what we do in the municipal level. So it shouldn't be a problem on our level. The way it's written is okay, because once federal law goes into effect, it changes, it'll change it simultaneously at that point. That's just what I want to add. So I'm in support of this.
All right. So I will call, seeing that there's no more discussion, no more hands up, I will call a vote. We're going to vote on two different things at two different times here. The first one is we're going to vote on the proposed change from this required to provided in the table. And then the second one will be on the proposal as amended. So, if it passes, sorry. So all those in favor of changing the verbiage in the table from required to provided, please raise your hand. I see 11. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 1, go ahead and lower. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1, okay, go ahead and lower. So the change in there stands. That is passed. David, do you have a comment?
I'd actually like to make another modification.
Okay, go ahead.
If it's possible, this is a modification to our existing amendments in the energy code. And maybe it's just a correlation, but I would make the motion to modify this to also delete section C405.10.3 and section R 404.2.3 from our amendments to the IECC. And those two sections require a space to require an accessible space, and it would completely contradict with the first part of this proposal that deletes that requirement from chapter 11. So if we leave those in the energy code, we have a conflicting codes.
Yeah, I don't know how we handle that because I think that would have to go through the IECC committee, and this is the IBC committee. So I don't think we can add that language within this proposal. However, I think the city's team will have to figure that out now moving forward on how that's going to be handled. So unfortunately, I can't allow that unless Shauna has some feedback.
Well, and I was just going to say that the energy code stuff has kind of been put on pause to see what happens with everything else, so that we make sure we don't move forward too fast and have conflicts. So that I think that just pointing out this intent is good, because once they start up again, they can look at this probably for you.
Thanks for that clarification. Good point, Shauna. Okay, any other discussions or comments before we call a vote? Seeing none, I will call a vote. You are voting to approve as amended on the screen. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see 11. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I see 1. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hands. Don't see any. Okay, so this passes as amended, 11 to 1 to 0. Thank you. All right, the next item of business is item P41, and that is Alan. Alan, go ahead. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead and give us a summary while I pull it up.
Alan Young, City and County of Denver Community Plan Development. I'm not entirely sure the relevance of this amendment anymore, but what it was proposing to do was to remove the exception to 1107.2, which exempted Group R 2, 3, and 4 buildings from the required accessible electrical vehicle charging station. The reason being that we have the requirements that committee member David Rudd mentioned before in our energy code that has a requirement for an accessible EVSE or EVSE capable space. And so this is a proposal to remove that exception in order not to be in conflict with our current amendments to the IECC.
Thank you. That sounds like good timing of this proposal. I will go to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, do you have any questions? Any questions from the committee? Third and final call, seeing none, I'll go to discussion. Discussion or to make a motion. Anybody from the committee have any discussion or motion? David, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll throw out some discussion first. I think this is needed to delete this exception because our energy code does require EV charging stations for these occupancies. So if we leave that exception in there, all the universal spaces we just passed would not apply to these, to the R2, R3, and R4. they would be exempt from all those requirements. So if we think this is required for those group of those occupancies, I think it's needed to take this exception out. But I'd
Okay,
like to
any
hear some
other
more
discussions?
discussion.
Okay. Any other discussion?
If not, I'll make a motion to approve as submitted.
Okay. Is there a second? Juan?
I'll second that.
Okay, great. Any other further discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote. The vote is to approve as written. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I have 12, 13. There you go. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I don't see any, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, great. So it passes. Wow, wouldn't that be great if all the rest of these go that quickly? Okay, the next item comes from Daniel, which is P30. Daniel, I will unmute you. Please give us a summary of your proposal.
So this is Daniel Kraus. I'm an architectural reviewer for Denver CPD. And my proposal is to amend to clarify 1028.4 or give me a second. I think this might be an old, in terms of the number, or maybe it's actually the new number because I'm looking in the 2018. So in the 2021, it's 1028.3. So egress courts are regulated specifically when you exit a building and you have a path that's confined to get you to the public way, then you, if that path is less than 10 feet in width, you would have to protect the exterior wall of the building that you're walking alongside. That would have to be a 1 hour wall and have limited or protected openings. And it shouldn't be applied to where you really don't have to be outside in order to egress, you just happen to be outside. So what this does is clarify. So for example, if you were leaving a tenant space of a building, and that's, often a retail space would have a glass exterior wall, it wouldn't be 1 hour, it wouldn't be rated exterior wall or protected or not have openings. And even though you are now walking outside alongside that open wall, if you were anyhow within the allowable common path of travel, you were allowed to, if that were inside, you would be no worse off. So even though you happen to have gone outside of the building, why would you restrict or protect that path? So that what this would do is it would allow an egress court that is not in the exit discharge. And one might argue that the language in the code itself, egress court serving as a portion of the exit discharge, is already really excluding where it's in the exit access. But I know it's been applied broadly to the exit access because the assumption is you've walked out of the building, you've exited the building. So if we could allow designers to imagine that they're in the exit access still, even though they are outside the building, and therefore they don't need to put that 1 hour wall up, which really gets in the way when you're dealing with the tenant space at grade.
Thank you, Daniel. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak?
I was just going to clarify for Daniel that in the 2021, egress courts is 1029, and you're proposing to add an exception number 3 to 1029.3. So that's the correct section.
Okay, thank you. Anybody from the general public wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody who wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to the committee for questions. Steve, go ahead.
Daniel, I guess my question is, by putting this into 1029, which, as you clearly said, 1029.3 talks about egress courts within the exit discharge. Do you think that this could create confusion and conflict in the code, or do you think it could be relocated in say, I don't know, 1016, which is exit access? We'd have to redo the language and everything else, and I really don't want to get into writing code, but is this going to create confusion, you think?
So I don't know that it will create confusion, but the way I would read, not read, but the way I would apply an egress court serving a portion of the exit discharge is I would apply it equally to any portion that is open to the sky and outside of the building, because I would always assume that the door between the enclosed building and the area open to the sky, which is the court, I would always assume that that door is an exit. So just by definition. So if an architect were to propose, hey, let's look at that door as not the exit and the area beyond the door not as the exit discharge, I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with that without a code section clarifying it, which is the purpose of this amendment. So I would apply 1028.4 unless it were amended. I would say that the area outside the building is in the exit discharge always, because you've always exited that door that is between indoor space and outside of the building. So you are now by default in the exit discharge. So without an amendment, I would not assume that this is providing exit access or allowed to provide exit access. I think it's the amendment that allows it. I don't believe it confuses the charging language in the code, which is clearly where it would be exit discharge and nothing else.
But isn't the definition of exit discharge is the path of travel from the exit, which is a protected part of the means of egress, to the public way? And if you're not going to the public way, how would that be exit access or exit discharge?
So an egress court does provide access to the public way. That's its purpose. So 1029.3 egress courts does regulate an egress court that leads to the public way.
And doesn't exit access provide a path from any occupied portion of the building to an exit?
Correct. So we are proposing here that an architect can choose to place the exit outside the building at the point where that limited width egress court terminates. That way they don't have to protect the exterior wall of the building. So again, if you have a stairway that's already an exit, you come to the bottom level, you discharge, yes, you have to protect that egress court because you've already been required to reach an exit. But we have many grade level tenant spaces that, or areas of buildings that egress through an egress court. But if that egress court had been in the building, it would be totally allowed. There would be no separation requirement from other portions of the adjacent tenant space. So why are we requiring them to be separated from the tenant space just because you happen to step out of the building?
All right, thanks.
Next question comes from Tony.
Daniel, sorry, wrong Tony. All right. Daniel, I kind of agree with Steve Thomas that we're adding confusion because currently the definition of egress court is the portion from the discharge point to the public way. You've already exited your exit path and you are outside the building or the confines of an exit route. So I think the way you're using egress court here is going to throw confusion into the provisions because you mentioned that in your intent, it's considered exit access, which immediately violates the existing definition of egress court, in section 2.
That's an excellent point, and it would need to be not italicized, and it would need to read courts providing, limited width court providing exit access. I agree with that, and I would ask that someone propose a change to not have that italicized if it's in conflict with the definition.
So that was question 1. The second portion is, do you think there's a risk of unintended consequences? And you know how we're building much denser, and property line issues and exposure to adjacent properties becomes a big issue with these courts. Would your proposal create an unintended consequence at those locations?
So it's questionable whether right now some reviewers are reviewing and applying this section too strictly, but it's been applied to, like, if you know the gyries in Lodo, where there's just an elevated, you walk out of a retail and you're on an elevated platform and you walk across, you're limited in width and you're forced to walk toward the street and, along the building. And it's been enforced that you have to treat that as an egress court, and now you have to rate the building exterior wall. So it's certainly, there's a need for this. It wouldn't be taken beyond where it's allowed for the interior of the building. So meaning, as soon as you've exceeded 75-foot path of travel, or 100, depending on the occupancy, you're certainly no longer going to be able to utilize this section. We're only saying that why would someone who happens to be under an open sky be treated differently than someone who were within the building? And to illustrate that further, if you were walking out of a building and the building projected, you were under an overhang, we would call that building area, and suddenly you could have all that glass between where you were standing outside the building to the building, just because you weren't under open sky. You were under an overhang of the building itself. So it's really nonsensical the way we don't allow exit access outside the building through in an egress court. Again, not the defined egress court, but the equivalent of an egress court that would be in the exit access. I don't see this being abused or misunderstood. I think it's very clear to me what projects it would apply to as a reviewer. And again, any project that you've already reached an exit, or you're required to reach an exit by the time you leave the building, you certainly couldn't apply this to.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Robert.
Yeah, I'm also confused by the use of egress court. Isn't it defined as enclosed on at least 3 sides? And in your example, would that mean a handrail on one side? Would that be an enclosed court?
It does not need to be enclosed on 3 sides, because a yard is also a court for the purpose of this definition. So it's a little complicated, but a yard could also be an egress court.
And then you would consider in your example that walkway as a yard?
Potentially, if you couldn't get over that, it depends how easily the reviewer believes you can get over that wall. If it was an example where it was sunken and you were below grade and you had to walk up to grade, it depends on the depth of that or the height of a wall. If it's the example of, similar to the gyries, but with a solid wall of a significant height, sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, next question comes from Paul.
Yeah, I think I generally support this, but I had the same issue with the terminology, because I don't think something can simultaneously be an egress court and exit access. So I'm wondering if the wording could change to something like egress courts complying with requirements for exit access. So again, kind of unitalicizing it, as Daniel suggested. Would that meet your intent, Daniel?
Yes, it would.
Okay, any final questions from the committee? And okay, seeing none, we'll move to discussion and or a motion. Anybody want to have further discussion or to make a motion on this? Steve, go ahead.
I'll make a motion for disapproval.
Okay, Robert?
I'll second that.
Okay. Paul, go ahead.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was just going to ask Steve for a little more of his logic.
Okay. So egress court is a defined term. And believe it or not, there's a lot of discussion going on right now about italicized terms and those kind of things. The terms being italicized is not in the code. It's in the preface of the code, which is not the code. So ICC is in the process of trying to figure out what they're going to do, because sometimes we have terms that are defined terms that are not italicized where they should be. So that's one side. So egress courts is part of the exit discharge. Exit access is within the building. Now, I understand what Daniel's trying to do, and I agree that we need to, that something should be figured out, because if we, for example, exit across the top of a podium and go into another portion of the building, that's still exit access because it's before I get to the exit. But if I have a stairway that comes down and discharges out onto that podium, I would agree with Daniel that now is exit discharge, and we now need to get those people back or off of that podium upper level and down to grade to the public way. So I agree that there's a problem. I just don't think this does it. I think if we're trying to say exit access can go outside and then go back into the building, then I think it belongs back in 1016.3 and I was, or 1016.2, and I was going to try to write code on the floor, and just it was like, okay, we don't have time for that. So that's why I'm saying it's confusing, because we're mixing in the same section exit access and exit discharge, and that just, we have a hard enough time getting people to understand the difference between the three parts of the means of egress as it is. And so that's kind of where I'm going from.
So follow-up question, would it not work to do my suggestion and say egress courts complying with the requirements for exit access?
Still in the exit discharge section though.
Well, because it is exit discharge.
Not necessarily. If I'm coming, say, well, if I'm coming out of the stairs onto that podium, for example, yes. If I'm coming out of a corridor to the exterior, I'm still in the exit access.
No, isn't that exit discharge once you hit the exterior door?
No, not necessarily. That exterior door could be an exit access door. I still meet my travel distance to a single exit somewhere. And then it's unlimited exit travel distance at that point.
I guess I'm confused.
I can understand.
Okay, we have more discussion. Julie's hands up. Julie, did you want to have any discussion or add to that?
No, sorry, that was an accident.
Oh, okay, no worries. Anybody else before we call a vote? Because there is a motion on the table. Keith, go ahead.
Hopefully I'm not off base here, but in section 1029.1, it says egress courts serving as an exit discharge component shall comply with the requirements of this section. So if it's an egress court that's not serving as an exit discharge component, because it's not required to serve as an exit discharge component, then the rest of the section doesn't apply. And so I think Daniel's exception is an example of a courtyard that isn't required to serve as part of the exit discharge. Or like Steve was saying, that you haven't arrived at the exit until you get to the exterior wall of the building and you're right, you know, you've walked through the courtyard, you're still in the exit access, and the exit is where you step away from the face of the building onto the sidewalk. So, I mean, maybe the solution that Daniel's looking for is in just reading section 1029.1 in a different way. Thank you.
Okay. Any other further discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote then. The motion on the table is to disapprove with a second. All those in favor of disapproving this proposal, please raise your hand. I see 9 hands. Go ahead. 10, sorry, one went up at the last minute. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Seeing none, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. All right, so this is does not pass with the vote of 10 to 0 to 2. All right, so that was P30. Next item of business is number 45. We are 5 minutes to go on our last hearing, so I will not continue on this last proposal just because there's no way we will get through it. We average a little over 20 to 30 minutes on a proposal. So unfortunately, we will not hear the remainder of the proposals for the IBC, IEBC, being that this is the last committee hearing. But I do want to thank everybody for their participation in these 4 hearings. This has been great. Even the community has been very involved, as we saw today, so that is great. Your efforts do not go unnoticed, and thank you for volunteering your time on the committee. As I mentioned before, the remaining proposals will be heard with an internal City of Denver group, and those discussions. I don't know exactly how that pans out in terms of how that gets relayed back out to the public, but I'm sure they will relay back out to the public what they decide on that. So thanks again, everybody, for your time. And I will stay on the line for anybody that wants to have any comments, feedback, good, bad, indifferent, just wants to vent or anything like that. But thank you again. I'm glad we got to end a few minutes early on our last hearing. We'll see you guys around.
Thanks, Kevin. Great job.
Right, yeah, good job.
Have a good day, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Kevin, I wanted to throw out a thank you to you as well. You are just so good at being a moderator, and I think that's sometimes left unannounced. And I really, really appreciate your professionalism and handling moving through these motions. So I commend you, and I'll definitely make sure that's passed up the ladder because it doesn't come easy. So I wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, good job, Kevin.
Thank you.
I want to say the same. This is a tough. This is a. I was going to say the same. Your job's a hard one for sure, and following the rules of order through all of this is, yeah, it's a skill that you do well with. I do wish there were a way that everyone that came here, I think, would have volunteered their time to have heard the rest of these items in another hearing. I feel like, there's probably not well, if there were an opportunity to just say, I would gladly volunteer, and I bet most of the people on the committee would have to continue to have had another meeting in a week or whatever to have heard the rest of these, because I think we all care enough about it to have done that. So for what that's worth.
I think that you will have the opportunity probably to put in your 2 cents. I'm sure that they'll involve the committee when they move forward, we asked for another hearing and they said no. I think that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and so I think that they still want your opinion and they're going to still seek your advice because you guys have already done all this research on it. They think that it's also maybe they have a budget, and so it's probably not as much about some of it about the committee's volunteer time, but also that sticking within their
Budget
budget
of doing the
because
thing.
they had so many codes and so many hearings, and so probably
Well,
some of
poor IBC 29, chapter 29, it's like gonna always suffer at the end. And it's the one that needs like 1,200 words of cleanup. And it's like, what? It's like the trickiest one in all this.
Well, next time we'll have to ask that they move chapter 29 first. Let's start at the bottom of the code and work our way up.
Right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Have a good night, guys.
You
Bye,
too.
everybody.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye, Kevin. Good job.
See ya.
Bye-bye.